Did you ever wonder how we got here? No. Not here to church this morning. What I'm talking about is here on earth, a part of creation. I can imagine a scene, and try and imagine it with me. Cool evening air soothes the tension and heat out of coarse grasses as it does tired, aching muscles. Gentle whispers of air stir leaves into accompaniment for the last evensong of the birds. Small diamonds begin to sparkle in the sky, 1, 2, 3 of them. With a sigh of contentment, the weary traveler settles into his evening prayers. Their familiarity brings peace and comfort. Looking around, the worshiper is suddenly filled with wonder and awe as never before and interrupts the words he learned as a boy. O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name throughout the earth. You who have covered the heavens with your splendor. From the mouths of infants and sucklings, you have founded strength on account of your foes, to put an end to enemy and avenger. When I behold your heavens, the works of your fingers, the moon and the stars that you set in place, what is humans? What are humans? That you are mindful of us. Mortals, that you have taken note of us. That you have made us a little less than divine and adorned us with glory and majesty. You have made us master of your handiwork, laying the world at our feet. Sheep and oxen, all of them, and wild beasts too. The birds of the heavens, the fish of the sea, whatever travels the paths of the sea. O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name throughout the earth. What a powerful, powerful prayer. What a splendid song of praise. What an incredible pattern for life. It's all here in these 9 verses of Psalm 8. It's that simple. Or is it really simple? Let's take another look. The first part speaks of the majesty of God. There is one piece, however, which could easily go unnoticed by our modern ears. The psalmist said, our sovereign, our Lord, and then in all the earth. In ancient times, this would have not been the expected way to talk about God. This would have been a shock. At that time, everyone knew that each tribal group had its own God and its own land. But in this psalm, we see something very different. It says, our sovereign, and in all the earth. This implies an understanding of God as the Lord of the whole universe. This is reflected again in verse 4. Our psalmist knew, maybe in that moment for the very first time, that God was the God of all creation. Nothing that was created was outside of the knowledge of God. What a startling realization for that time. If we today were to try to imagine that same thing, what would it look like for us? Well, We could start by saying that God is the same for all the disciples and the Methodists across the street. But that would be like putting a drop of water in a 50-gallon drum. Okay, let's say that all Protestants or all Christians pray to the same God. Good. Now we may have 2 cupfuls of water in this 50-gallon barrel. Even if we were to include all of our Jewish brothers and sisters and all of our Muslim brothers and sisters, we would still be filling our 50-gallon drum by the cupful. What would it really say to us to believe that God is the God of the whole of creation? Well, we would have to say that God is also the God of the people who chant anti-American slogans around the world. We would even have to say that God is the same God of all the terrorists of the world. It is hard for us to imagine that kind of stark reality. But that is what our psalmist this morning is saying. It is hard to continue to say God with us when we fully understand that God is also the God of the people on the other side of our issues. That, my friends, is exactly what this psalmist is saying in these opening verses. Next, it is the majesty of God which awes our traveler. Everywhere he looks, he is reminded of the greatness of God. The stars and the moon shine with wonder and the glory of God. Maybe our traveler has his family with him, and he hears his youngest child stir and talk to a mother. This reminded him of an even greater wonder. For he says, out of the mouths of babes and infants, humans are able to speak and express their thoughts and feelings in ways that none of the rest of creation can do. The first noises and prattle of small children reminds us of the fact that God's creative work is still ongoing as small children learn to speak, as they grow. Perhaps all these thoughts suddenly made the psalmist aware of the contrast of the vastness of creation with the smallness of each human being. What are humans, he cries, that this same God who creates such immensity is concerned with us. The tradition teaches that humans were created in the image and likeness of God. We find this in Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 and 7. This means that each and every human person carries inside them the image and likeness of God. In fact, our traveler realized that humanity was created just a little lower than God. Certainly we cannot be equal to God, since it was God who created us and not the other way around. Yet each one of us, each one you see if you look around, all of us have the divine spark inside of us. The divine image is part of who we are. Every human person. Each of us has been crowned with glory and honor, especially in the times we don't believe it. Remembering all he has seen on his journey, the psalmist pauses to reflect on all the parts of creation over which humanity has control. Awed by all he has seen, our traveler concludes as he began, with a triumphal acclamation of the greatness of God. How wonderful are your works, O God. So what do we make of the second part of this psalm? First, we might observe that the discussion of the paradox of humanity takes up 5 of the 9 verses. Over half of the verses of the psalm are focusing on why we are here and what we are supposed to do while we are here. What? I didn't hear the psalm telling me that I needed to do something. There's nothing directly said in the psalm about how we should live. Is there? I think there is, or there could be, if we look at it. Look at the relationship of things as set forth in the psalm. Humans. We are tiny, insignificant creatures who have sometimes grown too big for our britches. We can send spaceships to the moon and beyond. We can split atoms to our good and our ill. But what happens when nature unleashes its power? What happened to us during the last major earthquake in this area? What about the devastation from Hurricane Katrina when it blew through, or Maria more recently, from which they have still not fully recovered? Certainly we have learned quite a bit over the centuries. But when we realize how helpless we are in times of disaster, we are reminded of how vulnerable we are at all times. This is when we ask ourselves who God is, that God cares about us. Each and every one of us are precious to God. I am convinced that we are called to be co-creators with God. And I'm also convinced that we sometimes forget that there's a co in front of creator. Having dominion does not mean that we can ruin what God has created. No matter what we may think of global warming, there can be no question about where modern society has been and what we have done to our environment. But I think for all the damage humanity has done to creation, what hurts God the most is when we deny that we and every person around us carries within ourselves the divine presence. No matter what we have been or done, no matter how we have treated our fellow humans or even creation, we still carry the divine spark inside. God is still part of each one of us. The most amazing part of this mystery to me is that God never, ever gives up on any of us. God remembers that we are all created in the image of the divine. What we learn from this psalm is it is our job to remember that each and every one of us carries that divine spark, and treat each other as if each time we meet, we are in fact meeting God face to face. Amen.